Namaskar. Welcome to the 22nd episode of the Indian AdGeek. My name is Vishal Mehra. There's a word that gets thrown around a lot in advertising: purpose. Most agencies say it, few mean it, and then there's Uncommon Creative Studio, which did not just say it, they built an entire business around it. Founded in 2017, Uncommon started with one clear idea: to build brands that people in the real world actually wish existed. Not brands that people tolerate, not brands that blend into the wallpaper, but brands that matter. In just their second year, they were named Campaign's Independent Agency of the Year, then Campaign's Creative Agency of the Year, then both in the same year. The first time any agency had ever pulled that off. They became the first ever Contagious Agency of the Year, then picked up Ad Age's International Agency of the Year title in 2023. Fast Company named them one of the world's most innovative companies in advertising and marketing. Not once, but in both 2024 and 2025. And most recently, Ad Age's Design and Branding Agency of the Year on the 2026 A-list. They now operate out of London, New York, and Stockholm, working with brands like Nike, Jordan, British Airways, Pinterest, SiriusXM, and Formula E. Uncommon is now fittingly anything but. At the helm of all that thinking is co-founder Lucy Jameson, widely regarded as one of the best strategic planners of her generation, having featured at the top of Campaign's top 10 planner list multiple times. She was the global head of strategy for DDB and CEO of Grey London, and then came Uncommon. Welcome to the Indian AdGeek, Lucy.
Thanks very much for having me. I'm excited.
Well, then the excitement is on both sides of the aisle. How did you and advertising happen?
Well, I read history at Oxford, so that has absolutely nothing to do with advertising, but also doesn't really equip you to do anything in particular either. And I literally was in my second year thinking, I want to go to London once I finish. I need to start thinking about what career I might want to do. And back in the day, Oxford actually had an incredible careers library. And I'm not joking, I went through and looked at alphabetical order, and advertising is obviously one of the first things you get to. And I kind of knew I didn't want to go into the city and do banking or consultancy or law. So I was sort of already knew I might want to do something creative. And then when I started reading about advertising, I started reading about what was then known as account planning and strategy. And I kind of thought, you know what, that could absolutely be something I would like to do. And funnily enough, it is that sort of thing of I find people endlessly fascinating, why they do what they do, what motivates them. And that was always the bit of history I found really interesting. And a lot of the same skills are there. You're trying to figure out, look at a lot of data, a lot of books, a lot of stuff, and then try and figure out why something happened. And I think that's very much what we do every day.
Lucy, you moved from a massive legacy network to founding Uncommon. What was the specific broken part of the traditional agency model that you were most determined to fix?
So, I mean, look, there were quite a few different things, actually. It wasn't just one thing. It was that I felt like advertising agencies were too focused on just advertising. And I'd always wanted to focus on, actually, how do we build a whole brand? And we'd done a piece of work called Volvo Life Paint, where we had got a brief from Volvo about safety and sort of thought, you know what, it'd be terrible to write an ad about. We believe in looking after everybody. We believe in, safety, not just for the people in the car, but the people around us. And so we sort of thought, well, why don't we create something that demonstrates that point of view? And that was when we created something called Life Paint, which was a spray paint that you could spray onto backpacks and cycles and all of that stuff, so that people outside the cars in London could be safer because there's a lot of issues with cycle safety and pedestrian safety and stuff like that. And so we created a product, and we created a product that we actually, instead of being paid by the hour, Volvo paid us by giving us £1 for every can they sold. And that took us an enormous amount of time and negotiation for us and WPP to be happy with being paid that way. And that just struck us as being really, silly. And we were interested in different shapes of work, different business models, different relationships with clients. And we wanted to be able to explore all of that. And that was going to be really hard from within an advertising agency, which was a tiny part of a much bigger holding company. So for us, it was really that. And then it was that sense where I think we'd been mechanized just to win, not to care about who we worked with or which brands, just that all we had to do was win at any costs. And I think, I didn't really want to do that. I wanted to be able to work on clients that I thought deserved to really matter in the world and could really matter in the world.
Yeah, that's an interesting segue, Lucy. Uncommon's mission is to build brands people wish existed, right? How does that mission filter down into the types of clients you pursue?
So look, I think what somebody once asked us in a pitch, how do I go from just selling stuff to being a brand that actually people sought out and wish existed? And we thought, you know what, that is a brilliant, brilliant question. How do we take any brand we work with and make it something that people really love? Um, and that is, yes, advertising can play part of the role in that, but it's probably also going to be design, packaging, the retail environment, the visual identity that might make a difference there. It might be something in the UX, and the CX, which is why we're interested in that, why we create events and experiences too. And for us, we really kind of wanted to be able to look at that wider remit and help clients reimagine their brands so that they're brands people really love. Because there's so much data that says, 3/4 of brands could just disappear, and people wouldn't care if they went from their shelves or their apps or their phone screens. No one would care. But if you can become a brand that people really care about, you can charge a price premium and people love you for it. So let's try and take brands. They may not be there, but let's try and take brands and turn them that way. And for us, that's always been doesn't mean they have to be brands that are saving the world. They just have to know why they exist and why they make people's lives better.
Is it important, do you think, for every brand to have a purpose, Lucy?
I don't think every brand should have a purpose unless it is a purpose that aligns with their business strategy and why they exist. I don't think every brand needs to have a higher social purpose, but it needs to be a brand that actually does something for people, is useful or entertaining or, serves a purpose. I don't think it necessarily needs to save the world and have a higher social purpose. I think those are two different things. But I do think every brand needs a purpose in the sense of it needs to be clear why it exists and why it makes people's lives better.
In the early days of Uncommon, what was the hardest no you had to say to a potential client to protect the agency's DNA?
Yeah, I think we've said no to a lot of clients actually. Not necessarily. We say flat no to some categories that we are not comfortable doing. For example, I'm not comfortable working on gambling brands. I'd probably do the National Lottery, but I worry there's lots of very harmful, addictive gambling, and I'm not personally comfortable with working on those kind of brands. So there are some categories like smoking or gambling, I think we'd have a pretty hard no on. Um, but mostly it's not about a category. It's about looking around the people in the room and going, do you really want to change things? Do you want to make it better? Do you want to build one of those brands? Are you ambitious for that? And that for us is the most important thing. You can't always tell until you actually start sharing work and ideas. Um, a lot of people say, yeah, well, we want to change everything. And then when you show them some stuff that is a dramatic reimagining of their brand, they look at you like you're absolutely crazy. And that's when we tend to say, you know what, maybe we don't align. Um, and so it's really on a case by case basis. And it usually is that sense of, oh my God, even if that is a massive business opportunity, if we're sitting around a table and they're just going, no, I want more of the same, or they're going, are you absolutely mad for showing me that? That's when we tend to go, maybe this isn't a match made in heaven and maybe we're not right for each other.
Is there a pitch story you'd like to share? Something that you remember fondly?
Take one of our early clients, which was ITV, which is the UK's largest commercial broadcaster. And if, the BBC is very much the establishment channel, very received pronunciation, ITV is much more the kind of people's channel. Um, Very dear, dear friend of a friend, now a good friend, was the head of strategy at ITV. And she called me up and said, got this brief. It's a brand strategy project. Not really sure. Would you be into doing it? And so we, of course, said, yeah, that sounds fun. And we broke all the rules in that they'd specifically said it was a brand strategy task. And we went away. And yes, we did quite a lot of brand strategy work, but we also came back with creative ideas for where they might want to focus, lots and lots of stuff that was well beyond the scope. And I think some clients might have gone, A, that was quite a big investment of our time and money. B, it wasn't what they asked for, although part of it was what they asked for. And C, it could have been seen as treading on lots and lots of people's toes. But that definitely, A, it meant we won it. B, it meant we then got to do wonderful work over the next, sort of 5 years, from everything from, actually, in their case, a social purpose campaign, which was the biggest mental health campaign in the UK, called Britain Get Talking. We did work launching their new streaming service, ITVX. We did work promoting, their quality broadcasts. We did all kinds of stuff with them. And that definitely started with a pitch where we massively overstepped the mark.
But maybe that
So I guess that
showed,
would be one example.
yeah, but maybe that showed also your keenness, how passionately invested you were in the brand.
Yeah. And also showed to us, because it was for us, and we talk a lot to clients about, we are best when you're in a moment of change and you need not just some more advertising, but you need to reimagine what you do. And ITV was definitely in that moment, because they were in an old world of broadcasting where, it used to be them versus Channel 4 and the BBC. And suddenly they were up against the global streaming services. And we were going, you need to find a reason why you matter to people in the UK, and what role you play in shaping British culture. And that for us was really important. And that was part of reminding them internally as much as anything else. And then externally, you're really important. You're the people's channel. You shape how we feel and you change our culture. And don't forget that. And you need to remind the world that you do that and you care about that in a way that Netflix never will care about the UK. There was a logic to what we did for sure, but it wasn't really what we've been asked to do.
Many agencies struggle with the feast or famine cycle in terms of business development. I'm curious to know, how is your approach to BD? How does that ensure that your pipeline is steady and is good without losing the quality of the work that you guys want to pursue?
Look, I think at its heart, what it comes down to is we don't have a single passenger client. Every client we make brilliant work for. Most traditional agencies that I've worked for, they do some shiny stuff on two or three clients, and then they do a lot of stuff they hide in the cupboard downstairs. We're not really like that. We only want to work with clients where they are absolutely lined up. They want to do brave stuff. They want to build those kind of brands and they want that level of fame because it massively pays back. Disproportionate fame creates disproportionate results for clients. So for us, it's a really virtuous cycle because we are so focused on making sure that we deliver that for every single one of our clients. That means that every project is a calling card for another client to pick up the phone and go, I want one of those. And that is honestly the way it works. As soon as we let work out the door and just stop caring about producing the best work for our clients, the whole thing will fall apart. But we are really, really focused. I mean, we say to clients, everything we do is something else we're not going to do. And if you're going to hire us, we are going to be all in and we're going to want to do some brilliant, brilliant work together. It won't be easy, but it will create disproportionate results for you. And so it becomes a very virtuous cycle because they can see the kind of work we're producing and go, okay, yeah, I want one of those. So so yes, I think all our work becomes a calling card for other clients. And we're looking always at pushing the edges. So we do an increasing amount of design work into store design, for example, physical spaces, that kind of stuff that we're just pushing at the edges of. We've done several projects that coming out of we have a world-class design practice. We're now kind of building out our PR and cultural influence practice because so much of our work is about creating real fame for our clients. We just wanted to kind of supercharge that practice. And I think that practice is going to become more and more important in a world of AI and GEO rather than just SEO. You need to make sure that your brand is being talked about in credible publications and stuff like that, because that obviously influences LLMs. So, we have a view, I think, that physical experiences and design and experiential and PR are going to become more and more important in a world of AI slop.
I'm going to take some inspiration from what you just said, Lucy, around GEO, LLMs, and algorithms. Most decisions we take as humans are emotional in nature. We would like to believe and hope they are a bit more rational, but mostly that's not the case. So much of discovery, product discovery, is now being handled by AI tools, which means increasingly even decision making will be aided by them. Now, unlike us, these bits and numbers are rational to the T. I'm curious, would that mean that advertising will have to become more rational in future rather than emotional? Maybe a feature comparison, because that's how algos will read it, right?
I don't think it's that complicated in that I think that right from, you know, the beginning of time, you've needed to create emotion that drives people to want something. And then at some point in that journey, people are going to do the rational bit as well, unless it's a kind of, a bottle of wine or a bar of chocolate that you're just shoveling in. um, you're probably going to do that bit of, what, I should do my due diligence and just look at the feature set comparison. I kind of need to know that I want that thing first, and then I'll go away and do my due diligence. And I might kind of actually make it go in that direction because I know what I really want is over there. So I sort of think that that hard-working, rational bit has always been part of the customer journey. And I think it will always have to continue to be in the mix. Now, whether that is, we do endless sale advertising on British Airways, which is price and destination led. I think that work is, I would never underestimate how important it is. You just can't do just that because it doesn't create the desire. You've got to create the desire, the emotional desire. And I think you will still have to do that, even if stuff is being looked at there. Because I think we're still going to be doing the same thing. We're just supplanting one with another, if that makes sense. And I think, they will still be looking at things like who does, I don't know, GQ say is the coolest piece of fashion. That's not going to be done by rational stuff. That's going to be done by influencing the influencers. And that may still be by a really wonderful content series or an incredible kind of experience or a whatever that is then tooled for journalists or whoever to write about. That's the coolest brand in the sector. So I still think there is going to absolutely be that requirement to create that emotional desire. And in certain categories and certain purchases, absolutely the hard-nosed, which is the best kind of feature by feature comparison. So I think there will be both of those. They'll continue to coexist. They're just going to look quite different in where they show up and which bits and what place within the customer journey. I don't think GEO is going to replace that need for an emotional connection too. Is that, what do you think about that? I'm curious to know.
Yeah. I think, Lucy, discovery, like we were just discussing, discovery would go to AI as an algo. But I think what I hear you saying is the decision in that process will still be human led. And I think, yeah,
And
I mean,
where the algorithm and the geo sucks from, it's got to suck from somewhere. And that will be, from quite often PR, credible influencers, events, people writing about stuff who are still going to have to touch and feel things. So that's why I think things weirdly like activation, events, and PR are going to be slightly more important than they have been, even.
and I think then the difference really between low involvement categories and high involvement categories would become even more pronounced. So if my car needs a new battery or a new set of tires, I would leave that decision to the AI, you know?
Yeah.
I don't need to
Yeah.
bother myself with it. But
Yeah.
if I need a new, let's say a nice or maybe an upgraded sound system for my car, that's something I'll care about. So I might ask the AI, hey, why don't you suggest me top three and so on and so forth. But in the end, I would still prefer to go to a showroom, get inside their demo vehicle, listen to the sound, and then go with what I want to go ahead with. So yeah,
And
that's where
so
the
understand,
experience will come in as well that you were talking about.
yeah, and some categories will remain badge categories. And there are also some brands that, even in a low interest category, almost become badges. So I think there is surprising potential for things to become badges, even in boring categories.
That was actually a discussion I was having with Adam this morning, because they've done some really interesting work for Reserve Bank of Australia, right? Now,
Mhm.
a Reserve Bank, you probably wouldn't expect, I mean, banks do some interesting work, but the central bank, you wouldn't expect
Mhm.
a central bank to have an interesting campaign. And we were talking about, which categories he thinks are most fertile, boring categories which are
Yeah.
most fertile for interesting work. So Yeah, I can connect
We
with what
we
you're
look
saying.
at something like Hiscox, which is insurance in the UK and business insurance and consumer. That's one of our most loved and best campaigns, which looks at the consequences of when things go wrong in business insurance. It's the most disastrous campaign ever. And you'd think that was a very rational, very low interest category, but we've shown that that is a category that is actually fraught with emotion and really interesting, and you can do great work there. Um, so yeah, I think I think there's people are quick to kind of go, well, that's just a boring category. I think there are boring categories, but there's no such thing as boring brand.
That's the strategist in you talking, Lucy. Awesome. I want to talk about a category which is very close to my heart. I did tell you I run this other podcast as well, aviation podcast. So
Yeah.
I was very, very keen to talk to you about your fantastic work for BA, right? And you
Yeah.
did mention BA some time back.
Yep.
Now, a British original, it won big because just so simple and so brilliant. I mean, I think the greatness of the campaign was its simplicity, right? The reasons to
Hmm.
fly. And you're not
Hmm.
focusing on hardware. Admittedly, BA is not number one there. You're not focusing on anything else. You're focusing on reasons to fly. Now, as somebody who manages one of the most iconic airline brands in the world, um, what do you think is? I mean, you would have done, I'm sure, tons of research, and since onboarding BA, you would have had more access. I mean, is there a holy grail of passenger experience that you think even a television spot cannot figure out, cannot fix? I mean,
I
is there
mean,
something you'd like to focus more on?
look, I mean, I love working on airlines. They're fascinating. And, the whole business of travel is exciting. The idea that you're a national flag carrier is fascinating too, because people have an unreasonable sort of pride and connection with their national flag carrier. And for us, we looked at it as a real opportunity because coming out of the pandemic, British Airways had lost a load of money because they had to ground, 70% of their fleet and, all of that sort of stuff. And the truth is, it was going to take them a while to build back capacity and to build back the experience. So the first 6 months, they didn't have all their cabin crew back in. They weren't able to serve their full complement of food. There was a lot of stuff that needed to be built back. And the truth is, it takes a long time to build those things back in an airline because ordering planes, changing cabins, that's all slow, big stuff. So we needed to get people excited about and remind them why they loved flying and why to get back into a plane because people have got out of the habit. We needed to also remind them that BA understood each customer as an original, because that's really important. That is one of those intangibles about BA service. They don't just treat passengers like cattle. They really try and kind of understand them as people. Um, and so for us, it was really important to start gradually building up that perception. And then the longer we've been working with them, the more you'll see things like there's British original breakfast in the menu card, or on the High Life, the in-flight entertainment, there's a British original section. There's the safety videos, the period drama ones we've done. You can gradually start building up and up and up the experience. And, the British Airways team have really, post-pandemic, once they started to be able to build back that experience to base level, they've now started to invest a lot more money. So you're seeing, new things coming in terms of club suite and the level of food and the app and the lounges are new. And so we've just worked on new lounges in Miami and Dubai and places like that, where we wanted to help, we worked with the architectural team doing it to help build in a bit more of a sense of originality. So you would go into a BA lounge, feels British, it feels a bit local too, but there's some original touches in there. So for example, in the lounge in Miami, there's on the roof, but reflected on the floor is a London Calling sign. So you have to kind of play with it to get to see it. There's little touches there. So for us, it's always about that sense of how can we bring the best of British and kind of give that sense of that is what it takes. And that's what a great experience is. It's got those lovely, memorable touches that could only have been done by British Airways. That's what you're looking for, I think.
Before we move on, just a quick reminder to all of you who listen to the show but do not subscribe to it yet. Please do press the follow, subscribe button wherever you are listening to this. Back to our chat now. Lucy, you have positioned BA as a piece of brand Britain. If you were tasked with rebranding an airline in a market like India, would you lean into national heritage as heavily, or is that a strategy that only works for legacy flag carriers? Please.
You have to find a strand of the DNA that works in the local market that appeals to your other core markets. And so for us, that piece of, we're quite proud of the fact Britain's seen as a little bit eccentric and original, and it's got kind of soft power in terms of, music and books and creativity and sort of stuff like that. And that is something we're proud of in Britain, but I also think people outside Britain quite enjoy when they come to Britain. That's one of the things they like. That's one of the reasons people come here. Yes, there's the sort of heritage and castles and stuff like that, but there's also that sort of sense of, oh yeah, it's kind of quirky. There's a street scene, there's music, there's food, there's all that kind of that side of the UK too. And so I think you're always looking for what's the strand that people in your country can feel proud of, but that other people want to experience as well. So for me, that's always the win. It's a hard thing to pull through because you absolutely need to find that. And we loved British originality because it does sort of, I think people around the world think we are slightly eccentric. And I think people think there's a slightly kind of we're not exactly the most rule following nation. We're very polite, but we don't always follow the rules. And that sort of sense of originality and slight quirkiness you want to kind of come through. And that's what people expect and quite like. Doesn't feel like you're getting maybe the welcome you might get in a US airline. It's much more unionized and much more whatever. It's just different. So I think you need to play with that. And so I would be looking for what are the things that India feels phenomenally proud about, but that everybody else around the world wants to experience.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
diversity, the colors, and the food, the culture. Yeah, I get it.
Passion, all, yeah,
Yeah, all the soft elements, like you were saying, Lucy, right? Yeah. Hmm.
absolutely.
Lucy, when scaling an agency, there's often a tension between profitability and creative purity. How do you, as a founder, manage that tension in the boardroom?
Our role is very clear in that you hire us because we are going to give you a really different creative idea, which is going to drive disproportionate results for your business. And if we are not delivering that, we can't charge a premium. And we have to do that. It isn't it's it is quite a hand tool thing. You can go to a kind of crappy agency who'll plug some numbers into AI and give you average. System One have done some work where, they plugged in every single pizza ad. They got an AI to create a good pizza ad. They put it through their tests, and guess what? It delivered average. You hire us to go, you know what, we're not going to give you average results. We're going to create disproportionate results. And that's what you hire us for. And so for us, it isn't a kind of trade-off. It has to be we will only, we will deliver that, you will pay for that, and that's what you'll get. um, that's at least, very much what we're trying to sell. We're trying to sell, we believe creativity delivers, you know, disproportionate results. And that's why we generate uncommon value for our clients. And we have what we call our value chain, which maps out, if we deliver this, this is what we think it will do. This is how it'll get noticed. This is how it'll change perceptions of the brand. And this is why it'll change behavior and ultimately profitability. And so whether that is a piece of design or a piece of CX or a piece of advertising, we're always looking at, right, what's that value chain? How does that translate through into results for a client? And I think that's really important. It's not just us going, we want to win some nice creative awards. We're going, right, we're trying to do this because we want it to be loved, noticed, stand out, and that's why it's going to drive better results for you.
How do you view the consultancy versus agency battle today? Does Uncommon see itself competing more with the Accentures of the world or the traditional holding companies?
I mean, I sort of think it's interesting because we're a slightly unusual business in that our design practice is very core to what we do, as well as our, advertising and CX. And I don't see many of the consultancies investing at all in design. Um, do any of them have good design practices? I don't think they do. And I don't know that I think many of the holding companies do really either. So it's a bit weird. I mean, sounds terrible, but we are trying to be in a business of one, in that I don't think anybody else is trying to sell, really now trying to sell creative transformation. Because I think consultancies are trying to sell business transformation through spreadsheets, numbers, rational solutions. And I think holding companies are increasingly trying to sell efficiency, capability, and we'll do it cheaper with AI. I don't think many other people are out there saying, we're trying to sell the idea that creativity can give you an unfair advantage. I don't know that I hear that rhetoric from, WPP, Cindy Rose's most recent kind of strategy piece. Where was she talking about that? I don't think Artur Sadoun is talking about that in Publicis. I don't hear Accenture talking about it. So I don't know that. I think we play against all of them a bit, but we are very focused around what we think we can deliver. I'm not saying we're anti-AI or any of that. We absolutely use it and embrace it, but we see what our difference is that we are sort of very focused on using creativity to create a disproportionate result for our clients. So yeah,
If
I
you
don't
had,
hear that narrative
yeah,
much.
yeah, okay. If you had to give advice to an Indian indie shop, and in India, I can tell you there's so many
I
fantastic independent
bet there are.
agencies now.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
what
Who's
advice
the
would you?
best at the moment?
Who's the best at the moment? Well, that's hard. The gentleman I had on the very first episode of this podcast, Gotham, he runs Talented. It's a really, really good shop. Then there
Hmm.
are other shops called Together. There is Kulfi. Kulfi is a form of Indian dessert.
I know it.
There's a natural inclination towards that. No, but there's so many fantastic shops actually, and these are brilliant people who were part of course, holding companies, and then they got, kind of disillusioned with what they
Yeah.
were going through, and they were like, F it, I'm going to start something on my own, right? And those two, three people come together. There's another great agency called um, Fundamental. So
Mhm.
actually, there's so many. I can probably count 10, 12 agencies. So all of them are fantastic. But if you had to advise an indie shop based on your rich experience of starting an indie shop, what would you tell them?
Yeah. I mean, I think you have to be very clear on why you exist, uh, what you're for, what moment you're for, and why you're different from everybody else. I mean, it's all the usual things that you do as a strategist, to be honest. But I think too many people kind of go, I'm fed up with that. I just want to start something different. And they're not really focused on what are we going to say that is why we exist, why we're different, what we're for. I mean, we're really clear. We're for clients in a moment of change. Um, you know, whether it is ITV suddenly facing the streaming services, the global streamers, or British Airways coming out of a pandemic, or Google talking about how do we reinvent search, or it could be any of those things. Or Monzo going, we want to scale. Those sort of things when you're trying to change something, that's when data and algorithms can only take you part of the way, and you need creativity to reimagine where things could go. So I think you need to be very clear about why you exist, who you're for, and then you need to be really loud. I'm not a brilliant PR person, but my business partner Nils is a phenomenal, it's like he is just really good at that. And I think people forget that that is absolutely fundamental. You need to have a very clear positioning, and then you need to be very, very loud, disproportionately loud about what you're doing and why. And I do think those have been, we probably invested much earlier than most people do in, PR, in our own in-house PR, and thinking about how we wrapped, how we told the story, how we became a magnet for creative talent as well, not just, what clients we chased after. And then you need to be super, super disciplined and stick to it, because most agencies just end up chasing after anything and everything. And that's not how you build a brand. You build a brand by being quite disciplined about, what you do and who you're for. And so I would just say stick to that discipline, quite ruthlessly. And it's painful. There are times when we, particularly during the pandemic, we were like, oh my God, are we going to have a business in 6 months or a year? Um, so, we resigned the week after the Brexit referendum, um, which was not great for the British economy, and we were quite sad. We were 18 months old when the pandemic happened, and three out of our four biggest clients stopped their spend overnight. We've been through the ups and downs of it, and you just have to be, I think, throughout all of that, incredibly focused on, no, we're going to stay true to what we believe this brand is about.
You have also experimented with taking equity in brands, right? And in
Yes.
those instances, Lucy, does the agency client dynamic shift from being a service provider to some sort of a co-owner who's very involved, let's say involved instead of being meddling? But how do
Yeah.
you handle a situation where your creative instinct, your strategist instinct as a founder conflicts with the brand's needs, and those needs can be varied. Those can be P&L needs,
Yeah.
those can be administration related needs, so on and so forth. How do you figure
I
that out?
mean, I think we worked out with our very first brand, which was Halo Coffee. We're not good at any of the supply chain or logistics. We're rubbish at all of that. That is not our special sauce. You have to be in bed with people who absolutely are sector experts and understand that side of the business. We are really good at, design, brand, figuring out, in this case, it was one of the world's first fully compostable coffee capsules. So that for us answered a real friction and a need and was different from an Nespresso of the world. And because it had that inbuilt at the beginning, it was a brand that deserved to exist. It got disproportionate fame. But the business, because of the supply chain and logistics, was an absolute mess to begin with. And as a result, probably got beaten by other brands who were better at that side of it. So I think it reminded us of, yes, brand is super important. Don't get me wrong. It allows you to charge a price premium and it allows you to, create desire. But if you don't have the fundamentals of supply chain logistics, the business model in that sort of sense sorted, then you're absolutely screwed. And I'm not going to get involved in that because it's not my world. And I would meddle in a place where I don't have the level of expertise I need to, I can give broad advice, but beyond that, it's not my bag. So I think you learn to be respectful of all the other stuff that a business needs in order to survive, and really respectful of the fact that your bit of expertise is really important, but is really tiny. um, so I think you understand that. And then I think you understand increasingly which bits play where. Like at the beginning of a journey, nailing the founder's story, why you exist, what you're different for, all of that is really fundamental. And we're very good at helping a brand with their narrative there. We're also great at creating design in a way that makes a brand look gorgeous, premium, all the rest of it, credible, well beyond most brands at that stage, which means that when you're selling into a supermarket or a partner or whatever, you've got a disproportionate advantage. But we're not going to go out and recommend you doing brand advertising at that point. It's completely irrelevant. So I think we've got better at understanding which bits of our stuff might be useful. So yes, brand narrative right at the get-go, PR at the get-go, design at the get-go. The rest of it, nah, not so much. Wouldn't spend a penny on that to begin with, unless you've got giant
Right.
budgets. So I think we've learnt to be a lot more commercial and respectful of, where we can play a useful role and which bits of our armory are, which bits of a brand's life stage are most useful.
There's a interesting Indian startup, if you can call it startup. It's an agency only, but invest in brands. It's called Spring Capital. If you have
Hmm.
a moment, maybe check them
Hmm.
out. They've been doing something interesting because we were just talking about indie shops. Um,
Yeah.
I just thought of that.
Yeah. So we have an accelerator program. After our experiences at the beginning, we kind of went, you know what, we're not great at this. So we invested in an accelerator program called Unrest. So they take equity in small startups and they help them accelerate their journey by giving them advice on the legal track, the fundraising track, leadership, and we do the design, brand, and advertising bit of it. So we've had sort of 70 plus startups go through that accelerator program now.
Wow.
And that has also means that all our strategists get to kind of go and work with founders, understand how that works, help them get their story sorted. So it's great for them. It's really good for us. It's helped us hone how we think about this, where we're useful, what we do. Um, so Unrest are amazing. Really, really interesting business.
On strategy, Lucy, I've read how you have talked about applying the Hollywood model, which is bringing in a fluid network of, uncommon
Mhm.
minds. How do you maintain that consistent, uncommon agency DNA when
Yeah.
your strat team is bespoke and changing for every project? Does it ever lead to an
So it doesn't.
identity crisis or
So we have a core team in every market in New York, in London, and in Stockholm, and then we expand it. Um, so, we will different markets. For example, we've worked with Uncommon Minds in India on British Airways, for example. We've worked on Uncommon Minds in Italy, in just different markets where our clients have needed to be. And what's great is I think because we've got a very clear brand and DNA, and we have a very clear what we call ROS. So we have, our brand way of doing brand on a page, our way of thinking about unmapping, which is figuring out where you can add uncommon impact throughout a customer experience. We've got the value chain, we've got all of those sort of things that help us think through that. So it's quite easy for somebody to come in and pick up, oh, that's how they do things, and see our work and the way we apply things. So I think we have a head start in that we have a very clear point of view on the world. We tend to attract people who want to do the kind of work that we produce. So it means we get to do that. I have a good network, global network of strats, because I used to run the global strat network at DDB for many years. And, I still do training with people like Huala and lots of stuff like that. So I have, a reasonably good network of people. Um, and then we also work with, say, a music specialist when we need to do deep dive that into that, or materiality or sustainability. So the point is to have a very core kind of foundational team, and then we supplement it with different people coming in and out with either specialist local market knowledge or specialist insight of a category we don't know so much about, or a deep dive like sustainability. I'm not a sustainability expert.
yeah?
So and we really love that. Keeps everyone in the team fresh, gives them new people to learn from, and it's always a really lovely value exchange, actually.
You have championed fast strategy and noisy thinking. In an era of AI driven insights, is thinking slow becoming a luxury that agencies can no longer afford? Or is it the only thing that will save us from becoming a sea of sameness? And does AI add value?
Massively adds value, but quite often I'm almost looking at it going, right, what's the obvious answer? I'll get AI to do all of that. And then I'll kind of go, right, how do I turn it on its head? And sometimes even actually prompts can be, right, okay, if I was to ignore all the best practice, what would you tell me to do? It can kind of trigger good thinking actually as well. So I am absolutely not averse to AI. I think it speeds up and accelerates a lot of thinking. I think it provides you a lot of the obvious answers very quickly. You need to know what you're doing though, because I've got nearly 30 years of pattern recognition, of understanding where I think something is good or bad, or being able to figure out where a good hunch might be that will lead. And I worry a little bit that people coming through won't develop that same sense of, I've been through the crunchy things of where it's been difficult and where I've thought it would be a really good thing and then why it hasn't worked, or, so I've got a kind of spidey sense of things, which only comes, I think, from painful knowledge of where things have gone wrong as much as they've gone
Yeah,
right.
feet on the street, right? Nothing beats that.
Yeah. And also that sense of I sort of can recognize what sort of a problem this is, and I can kind of go, it's a completely different category, but it reminds me of that. I'm going to go away and dig that out. And for us, I think very often our clients are often deep experts in their category, But where we are unusual is being able to see right across every single category. And quite often it's that kind of thing where you go, oh, this reminds me of that in that category over there. Why don't we try that? Because that's never been done in this category. And that can unlock massive value for a client because they would never have thought about it because they tend to be category specialists, for example. And I don't think an AI would probably come up with that. You could get there, you could prompt it to do that, but you'd need to have the experience to kind of go, oh, I think it,
I remember one of my bosses told me many years back that Vishal, go down five level of whys, and in some respects that might apply to AI as well. I mean, straight away it'll probably give you the lowest hanging fruit, but that everybody will get, and you'd be like,
yeah.
that's AI slop. But yeah,
Yeah.
you really need to dig in and maybe
And I
do a
think quite
different
often
level.
the five level of whys might be something that somebody within a category would already do. For me, it would be the five levels of sideways whys are actually the bit that I think is, you know, harder for most people and AI to do because being able to figure out what is a good parallel and what isn't is quite often quite hard, but really helpful.
As someone who looks at global trends, what is that one thing about the future of the agency business model, that excites you the most?
So look, I think you build brands people love by doing stuff they love. And I think increasingly that will come from IRL stuff. Whether that is wonderful events, immersive experiences, beautiful products and packaging, things you can touch and feel in a world that is increasingly, virtual. I think that is one of the big kind of opportunities. And I get very excited by that. I mean, I love work like there's a wonderful set designer called Es Devlin. I get excited when you go to a concert and you see what they're doing with, their set design or what those experiences are now like. A lot of that is high-end stuff, but I think there's something really interesting in a kind of, not just the, oh, we're going to show up at a music festival and do the same crap as everybody else does because we're a beer brand and it's generic and boring, but applying the same out there level of creativity that you create something wonderful, memorable, emotional that people are going to love and remember and write about and get talked about and show up in GEO articles, all the rest of it. I think that is a big opportunity because I don't see many ad agencies or creative businesses doing that at scale. I see some boutique kind of very high end sort of set designers, production studios doing that. But I don't necessarily think that a lot of brands are applying that level of creativity. They're spending a lot of money on events, experiences, sponsorships, partnerships, but maybe not applying the same level of creativity as they could be to them. I think that's really fascinating as a place to play. Wonderful design, wonderful experiences, stuff that people love. I think there's just huge opportunities there.
And how do you see the agency of the future, Lucy, with all this AI hullabaloo?
I definitely see there's a massive role for AI. An agency that says they're not going to do AI is an idiot. There's, yes, we will use it to automate it. We will use it to accelerate our thinking. We will use it to create stuff we can't currently create. We'll use it to prototype ideas. We'll use it for all of that. So, without a shadow of a doubt, we use it for data, all kinds of stuff. That will be a base layer for sure that, needs to be a fundamental. And that, by the way, is not cheap in terms of licenses, in terms of training, in terms of people. Everyone says it's going to be massively efficient. I think it is, but it is also quite expensive, all of that. So I think that is fundamental, but then I think you build on top of that boutique creative that really is, I think, a smaller group, unfortunately, of very talented, more senior people who can actually beat the average that you will get from an algorithm. I think there is a role for that. And then I think showing up with that in more interesting places across a brand's ecosystem. I have always loved, like I always use this example. The Google Doodles for years was actually the thing that shaped how I felt about that brand far more than any advertising did. And I think that was an exercise of creativity. And to me, I kind of go, that's what I want to see. I want to see creativity showing up in unloved surface areas of a brand and doing something amazing. Not necessarily in traditional paid media, it might be there, or it might be in creating an amazing event that means I'm going to remember that and talk about that in decades. So you want really creative people who can define a brand, think through all the places they could play in the customer experience, and then use their creativity to transform bits that might not normally be looked at. That's what I see as the future of an ad agency. So it genuinely is that kind of high end. We're going to use really impressive people who understand a business thoroughly, how you can transform it through creativity.
I love that. That you want to see creativity on unloved surfaces of a brand. I think that's so powerful. It's so simple, and I think that's why it's so beautiful. But I'm going
Okay.
to tell my team that tomorrow as well. Tomorrow morning, first thing, that's what I'm going to tell them. Fantastic. Do you have any books or podcasts that you like that you'd like to recommend to our listeners?
If they haven't listened to it, Adam Morgan's podcast he's been doing on Dull is a really good one. The Cost of Dull, because I actually think that's a kind of such an interesting exercise in we're always talking about how we make things efficient, but we don't talk about the cost of things then being boring. And that's a really interesting, some of the work he's been doing with Peter Field on the extraordinary cost of dull, I think is a really good one that not enough people have been listening to. And then, I mean, I listen to all the usual stuff as well. But that one, I don't know that your listeners will maybe not have heard of yet.
Thank you so much, Lucy, for being so kind, for being so
I really,
generous with your
yeah,
time.
thank you. I really enjoyed it. It's one of the fun things of our job, trying to talk about what the best bits of it are.
Yeah, and I feel we have the best job because every day you get to work on a new product, a new category, you get to learn about it.
Why
Awesome.
I'm still doing it after all these years.
Well, the
All
glow
right.
shows on your face, Lucy. Thank you again. And
The
I
pleasure.
hope you have a lovely evening ahead. Thank
And
you.
you, and you.
As we wrap today's conversation with Lucy, I'm stuck on one specific thought. The idea that the skip ad button isn't a technical feature, it's a consumer verdict. Lucy's career is a masterclass in the uncommon truth that the best business strategy is not about how much noise you make, but about how much space you fill in people's lives. Next week, episode 65 of the Indian AdGeek is going to feature two massive heavyweights of the industry. Stay tuned for that. If you've enjoyed this episode, hit subscribe, leave us a review, drop a rating, and share it with someone who might enjoy it. The Indian AdGeek streams on all major podcast apps. Lucy is not active on X, but I am at Vishal Mehra everywhere. Hit me up with your feedback. Until next time, keep your creative antennas tuned and your ad geek flag flying high. Stay quirky, stay curious, and keep geeking out.